something set up. If you want to join our Discord, if you are interested in future events like this.
Okay, I'm kind of surprised and flattered to be invited. I know Sam, for example, I was shocked. I think he's taken 2 classes with me, and I would have bet he's had more than enough lectures from me. So I've been asking for more. I'm just like, and yeah, you're shaking your head exactly the same way. I know. But anyway, I thank you, Sam. I appreciate it, and I do support the IEEE. It's a great organization at the global level. So the student chapter is just the beginning of it. So Sam did ask me this long title, and I translated it a little bit to a slightly different title, which is, it started off being your future and then your professional future. I am kind of thinking of this as for upperclassmen and graduate students. But I think the first year, second years that I see, well, I think those are, you'll have a good time too. It's just maybe a little bit off. There will be some vocabulary and some things that are a little advanced and from out of the field. So because it's a professional future and because this is engineering and technology and related fields, I have to go into a little bit of, I think it would be important to go into a little bit of the business side of the house, the industry structure. Because if you're trying to navigate from classrooms into industry, you really want to understand what that framework is, what that looks like. Okay, and a couple of you from 1350 this semester, when I say the word framework, you've seen that in class, and the rest of us probably haven't, but they will. So this is your professional future, and the time scale at which I'm mostly thinking about are decades, right? And the point of this is you'll if you work to 65, right? That's 40 years. That's over a 40-year career, right? If you're a little bit older and you get into 30, that's still a 35-year career. So the question is, how can you gauge what's going to happen? And how can you position yourself for success or just happiness across that multiple decades kind of a thing? So I want to give you, it's one thing that I can't give you because I'm older than dirt. I can look back at the last 40 years and I can give you an organization. I can give you a structure. I can give you some rules of thumb of how things change, and they do change. And so we can predict some trends out of that, and we can prepare for things that are even not in those trends. And that's sort of the goal of this talk. So technology changes, and then I put a quote up there: gradually, then suddenly. Is there anybody literary enough in the class to recognize what novel that came out of? It's Ernest Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises. And they weren't talking about technology, they were talking about how to lose a fortune, how a fortune is lost, how money is lost. And it's gradually, then suddenly. But it works just as well, and there's probably more parallels if we choose to explore it between losing a fortune and changing technology. For every real great success, you do have some not so great successes and some failures. So I started talking about this last year, and I really restructured it for the 1350 folks in this year. And this is my organization of our industry of engineering. In fact, we shape materials into components. There are more sophisticated components called devices. We put devices together, say, think of printed circuit board, into modules, and then modules go into systems, and then into networks. And so, for example, the interstate highway system is a transportation network, or it's a part of the global transportation network, which would include shipping lanes, ports, airports, garage stations. Perhaps a garage or a gas station, that might be a module, or a bridge might be a module, right? The concrete or the asphalt of the road, that would be materials. turned into a road with shaped slopes to let the water off, that would be a component. So you could, this fits a lot of different things. And if you're talking about industry, if you're going across to the Cox School of Business, the closest thing you would come to this is called the value chain. And so firms and most companies that you're looking at will work in one of these layers, or maybe two of these layers. And so they'll take incoming materials, and they'll shape their components, and they'll ship it out. By moving the materials from carbon to a little tube with wires on it, they can charge a few bucks. They can charge a few pennies, right? And so they add value by shaping, they add value by turning silicon into chips. They add value by making sure everything works on a board, a 1 RU unit, and so on. And so that's why they're calling this the value chain. Because most firms do only one or two of these. We call this horizontal. In the very early days, companies like IBM and Bell Telephone did soup to nuts, everything under one roof. And that's called a vertical integration. And it's very inefficient. It can be very inefficient. It's probably useful if you have no idea of the technology or you're in an incredibly regulated industry. But generally speaking, value is created if you've got 2 or 3 firms at the module level competing for sales into 3 or 4 firms at the systems level, and so on. Okay. Money generally starts at the top. The networks take their cut, and they come down, and the money flows down to the bottom. And so every time you see that arrow, that's a negotiation. That's a haggling, right? That's a marketplace. I'll sell this to you for $5. No. I'm only going to spend $3. Right? That's what's going on at each one of these things. And the result of each of those negotiations impacts the success and future success of that firm, of both firms. Okay, so that's that tension. That also suggests different. So if you're going into industry, right, and this doesn't have to be electrical engineering, it doesn't have to be computer engineering, it can be any, and it's usually good for any kind of industry. You can map a financial service firm onto this. Understanding these boundaries and understanding exactly what your firm does relative to the final flow of money into the system. Okay. Here's a really quick example from communications. Ultra pure glass allows fiber optics. If you dope that fiber with something called erbium, a rare earth ion, that has spectroscopic properties that gives gain, it amplifies the optical signals going through it. You take that fiber, you pump it with lasers, you package it. That's an EDFA. Oh. That's an EDFA. You now have all these devices, materials, and systems. You put them into links, say each one of these lines on this network, boxes that go in data centers, and together you mesh, you connect. And if you look at that carefully, you'll see that most of those crossing points happen where there's an NFL team. Right? Nothing to do with the NFL. The NFL and those intersections happen because that's where population is. That's where traffic originates from. Okay? So this is telecommunications. It's actually fiber optic communications. It's ignoring the wireless side. It's a marvelous sector, industry sector to work in. The real need is that people want to communicate. People want to communicate because they're social. People want to communicate for commerce. That haggling that you and I were doing, that could take place, across the fiber optic link. Okay, so this is one example of the framework or the value chain being put in place. I got to talk a little bit about software. Actually, I'd really like to talk about algorithms instead of software. I think software suggests sort of low-end code. And algorithms are the underlying mathematical logical structure underneath that code. And generally speaking, you always think in terms of algorithms and dumb it down for the computer into software languages. And most of you are going to be thinking algorithmically as opposed to just coding. You do coding, but your thought process is at a higher level, and that's the algorithmic level. So you don't really program an individual transistor. You might program it once it's in an integrated circuit and on a board, right? You might program that board. So I've left algorithms and software down the low end, the bottom end of the framework, and added it only on the top end. Algorithms also link together the top end. They also allow modules to be coordinated, orchestrated into systems and networks. So that's another place where algorithms work. The writing of new algorithms, that's an innovative amount, that's an innovative thing. You can get paid for that, right? Coding, maybe. But algorithms, the magic behind algorithms, that's incredible. You can make money anywhere that I've been talking about so far, right? And probably because the markets tend to favor expertise and the very, very best, you'll probably be very specialized, right? But some of you will want to keep broad. We do need some breadth. And then to improve each of these elements, we have design software, right? Spice, for example, Cadence, for example, HFSS, for example. Each of those are examples of engineering design software that are used to design devices, design modules, design systems, and so on. HFSS, high frequency systems simulator. And that would be primarily at the systems and modules level. Okay, you know, a little bit of devices too, but mostly modules and systems. So a lot of the engineering jobs, a lot of the engineering design jobs, and those are really good jobs. We don't think about them very much at SMU, but a design engineer is a great aspiration. A lot of what they'll do is they'll work in front of a design software. They'll get very, very good, very, very intuitive with how that software is working, and they'll be able to design incredible circuits. I see some analog folks in the back, and they can tell you how much time they spend in front of Cadence, I think you like. No, anyway. Now, other drivers, the cycle is never-ending improvement, and that's where we make our money. Never-ending improvement. Right? There's iPhone 1 comes out, everybody cheers, 12 months later, and the iPhone 2. Behind the scenes, there were thousands of engineers working to integrate all that together into an iPhone 2, an iPhone 3, an iPhone 4. And what number are we on now? 17 cycles, 17 cycles of improvement. 17 cycles of improvement. Where else? So where do these come from? Precision. Across time, precision of manufacture. If I'm building something with a pocket knife, whittling to get wood that fits in place together, my structure by today's standards will be very crude. Structures by people that before the pocket knife was invented, who are using, flint to scrape, it would be miraculous. Okay? Just putting this in perspective, right? Design tools, people have to build better and better design tools as the technology advances. That's sort of a very elite kind of a nerd, right? That's somebody who understands the deep material science that goes behind two-dimensional materials. The deep quantum mechanics that go into quantum mechanics that go into transistors, quantum mechanics and electromagnetics that go into transistors. As networks and systems get really big, test and verification of them before shipping matters. In other words, you can't take a network, and a network can work at one state or not work at one state because of the history. What states were in it before? What got loaded into the cache? What got where the voltages are? What the logic has led you to there? So depending on how you got to that state, the network could be fine or it could fail. You can't test. You can't test that, especially as you're adding and subtracting elements from that network. So test and verification is an insanely difficult career. It's run mostly on heuristics. Heuristics is a fancy word for this it's worked in the past, so we're going to try it again, right? Rules of thumb. But this is another great place to work. And I think the underlying tools of that are going to emerge tremendously across the next 10, 20 years. Even the fundamental mathematics behind that is just now being written. If I'm going to develop something from scratch, I need money. I need engineers. I need a team of engineers. Those cost $250 to $500K per engineer, plus their toys, design software, computer, lab bench, oscilloscope, and so on. I need a number of those, and I need them to be working for 18 months, and I need to feed them. I need finance, and I can't even promise you a dime, right? Because I haven't even put my final product together to show that there's any real demand. I can argue for demand. I can test the markets. I can interview, but remember, 18 months, the world has changed. Right? You may want to, the demand might be there today, but not in 18 months. So what's incredibly important for engineering is the money that flows in that allows us to do these design and development projects. And historically, the US has been one of the leaders in providing that kind of venture capital, venture finance, new venture finance. And this goes back to the days when we were whaling to get whale oil and bones and ivory and all this stuff. We would pack some mariners in a ship. We would ship them out of Nantucket or Bedford or places up in the Northeast or all over the world. They'd travel the seas maybe for years. Remember, as an investor, I had to buy a ship. I had to load up with food and harpoons, and I don't get a dime until they come back, right? So from that model, it's the same development model. You're gone for years building your product. I haven't seen a dime as an investor, right? And so that model from the whaling industry survives today in terms of how much money goes to the crew, how much money goes to the captain, the CEO, how much money goes back to the investors, and so on. And it's remarkable that that structure of the early whaling ships is followed by places like Sequoia, Kleiner Perkins, Andreessen Horowitz, and the Silicon Valley. There are other ways of financing, government finances, public-private partnerships, things of that nature. They also come into play. If you're in the DoD, if you're in the Department of Defense sector, the defense sector, you're generally ultimately going to be taking money from the Army, from the Navy, from the Air Force, from the Marines. So that's highly government centric. Other countries do like more or less government involvement in their finances. Historically, the whaling model has worked really well, right? As a venture capital. Again, some of you might wind up in, whether you aspire to, whether you realize it or not, some of you might wind up as a partner at a VC firm. Maybe you'll start a company in 10 years. Maybe that company will make a lot of money for other people and yourself, but other people is very important. You don't want to think about it, but it's true. And then you might get on at a VC firm and do it more in a portfolio manner. Right? I don't buy, as a whaling investor, I don't buy one ship. I buy shares of a dozen ships, right? If you're the captain of one ship, you're that one ship, right? So think about the risk, think about the commitment levels of those, okay? And then the market oftentimes also improves. You can say through feedback, and you can say through other aftermarket improvements as well. New architectures divide at the top. It will drive demand for new devices and components and materials. Suddenly discovered new materials and material classes will provide value to the top ends and completely shifts architectures. I'll give you examples of that. Where you work will drive what you innovate, what you invent. And that is your job. Your job is not about a repository of knowledge. Your job is to apply that knowledge to solve problems that you haven't even dreamed of in a systemic, rational manner. What's the pace of this change? What's the pace of this change? And my argument is it's easier to predict the future than it is to predict when that future is going to happen. But we do have tools. Moore's law, which is very commonly known, 50 years. Transistors doubling every, 18 months, every 2 years? Yeah, look at the noise on that, right? And this allows the industry from 1970 to about, let's say 2020 at least, to predict where that industry was going to be in the next couple of years. So people that made the tools that were part of the material science would know the demand on the lithography. They would know the demand on the processing. They'd know the demand on the precision of manufacturing. People at the high end, the modules, would know how many transistors on the chip they had to play with. And so they could say, I need this number of chips for this task, this number of chips for this task, this number of chips for that task, because they knew they could count on what was going to happen in the next 24 months. And did I tell you it takes about 12 to 24 months to develop this kind of a product? So this kind of predictability, even over a couple of years, is gold. In 2 years, the hockey puck is going to be over there, and that's where I'm going to skate to. Okay, not where it is now. This learning curves occur everywhere. The telecommunications industry that I showed you before, city to city communication, that's been around 200 years, over 200 years. And that's had a 1,000-fold increase in speed every 50 years, except in the last 10 or 20 years, 10 or 15 years, it's been faster than that. It's been faster than that, so it's flipped up. Pace of technological change. Some of you may have heard of Hamming codes and Hamming distances. Hamming was a mathematician at Bell Labs, and he did a very simple model of this learning curve. He did a very simple model of this learning curve, and with a little bit of data, he shows the scientific knowledge doubles every 17 years, and it's been doing this since 1700. 17 years to double our scientific knowledge. If you invested in that in a bond or for a dollar, that's a 2% return per year. Terrible. Terrible. But it's been going on for a long time. And cumulatively, it's a huge force, right? 17 years. How long did I say your career was going to be?
45.
35, 40, 45 years. 2 doublings, 2.5 doublings of knowledge. That's the world that you're going to. Do you think we have a lot of knowledge now? Double that and then double that again. That's what I saw in the last 40 years, in my 40-year career. I thought we had a lot of knowledge when I graduated, and now it's amazing. And it will continue to be, barring anything really extreme. By the way, here's the simplest differential equation that shows that. What it said, all it says is the increase in anything, any numbers, right? Of fruit flies in a petri dish will grow proportional to how many fruit flies start off in that petri dish or in that petri dish, right? So if I have a certain amount of knowledge, then that knowledge will double depending on how much knowledge I have, right? So this is the governing simple first order differential equation. And as long as A stays constant, the growth rate stays constant, then things will go on and on and on and on and on forever. one of the things that drives this growth, one of the things that drives economic growth, probably one of the biggest things that drives economic growth is the number of people, the number of people. And I don't know if you've seen this before, this concept before, but there is the folks that track this, UN and World Health and a variety of others, are looking at the population over time, looking at the growth rate, the reproduction rate over time. And what they see is, we're here, by the way, on this yellow. Back here is where I started. And you're going to be here at the end of your career. The growth rate is declining. And so you're actually going to see at the close of your career, you're actually going to see peak human, if this is right. Now, before then, don't get me wrong. Before then, if we're at 8 billion, you're going to see another 2 billion people. You're going to see another 2 billion people on this planet. Okay. I saw 3 billion rise. Right. I saw the steep part. What that meant for the economy. Consumption goes up, supply goes up, demand goes up. That's one of the reasons why my generation has seen, you know, a nice economic return. You will too. You will too, because you'll see a pretty healthy continued N population. But resource acquisition, competition for resource acquisition, huge shifts in demographics will drive huge geopolitical shifts as well. So there'll be slow turmoil across the next couple of decades. Frankly, just as there's been in the last 20 years, okay, and before. The world is not static. The situation is not static. But it's fair to say that human beings make their own weather. Okay. So have you seen this before? Is this sort of, has this come across your feed at all? It's pretty shocking. It's pretty surprising, right? It kind of looks like an S curve. Does this flatten out? Does it go down? You know, what happens after that? It's a long way off in the future, or not, depending on how old we are. So here's another piece of another application of the framework. Looking ahead, my daughter is a neuroscientist. She went into, and I think that's a great field for the next 20 years. I think neuro is a great field, and there's plenty of room, by the way, Sam, for electrical engineers to play that in medicine and in neuro in particular, but also all of medicine. It just hooks right onto your body. She's a type 1 diabetic, and so she's got a pump and a sensor that's integrated. It's a external artificial pancreas, right? But what she'd love is for macromolecular chemistry, biochemistry, new pharmaceuticals to give rise to a replacement pancreas, one that's not hooked onto her body, but actually inside of her body regulating it. And that could be purely bio, it could be biomechanical, it could be bio and electrical, you know, and controlled and all. So I think this idea of new materials from this field, new pharmaceuticals is just one example. It's easy to digest. Artificial organs, and then if you think about it, your brain works pretty well, and it works pretty well on a handful of Chick-fil-A nuggets, right? And the energy in the Chick-fil-A nuggets is a lot less per processing than what a computer chip needs. So it seems to me then what we might want to do is try to harness the actual functioning of the neural system and gain huge efficiencies. Gain huge efficiencies in processing because we're doing it biologically or biomimetically. And I'm not talking about linking together transistors and making up some buzzword like neuromorphic, right? I'm talking about true biomimetic, where we actually learn to engineer exactly how those processes work, including perhaps using similar or the same kinds of macromolecules. Okay. By the way, we learn chemistry through random collisions, right? Think about a macromolecule that has to be in the right isomer out of thousands, facing in exactly the right way for their collision in order to make efficiencies of reactions in the 90%. Our efficiencies are 30% by random. So there's something distinctly not random about chemistry, big macromolecule chemistry. We don't really know that. We have some names for it. We have some images of it. We can think about it, but we don't know it to the point where we can mimic it, where we can engineer it. It's still very much in the science world. And pulling that into engineering will allow us to do artificial organs and neuromimetic computers. And then the last one I think should be genuinely shocking to you. I predict that within your career path, and that someone will go from hacking life through tissue engineering in your dorm room closet, which by the way has been going on for 20 years, 25 years. Students have been hacking life. I don't know if you know any of these at SMU, but they've just been creating new life forms through sequencing and so on. The result of that, particularly if you strive for it, and people will be to make an intelligent synthetic life form. To make a synthetic life form that has various amounts of intelligence. I can't imagine a better experiment to do if I wanted to learn what intelligence was to design an animal, design a species that actually had that intelligence. Okay, am I shocking you? I intend to. I truly believe that what I've said is completely plausible across this time frame, and yet the ethical concerns, right? What does that mean? I mean, that should really be troubling to you. But you should not be. You don't leave it as a surprise. Think through what could happen, right? It may not be what you prefer to have happen, but you should be prepared for what could happen. Okay. All right, that's synthetic life forms. In some respects, that's genuine life forms that has intelligence. How many of you are worried about artificial intelligence? Nobody.
I mean, I'm worried about like strain on networks. They get so much power.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're not fearing for your jobs?
Not as an engineer.
Pardon?
Not as an engineer.
Good. That is a message that I wanted to convey to you. And that's one reason why I didn't really start with that. But I have some thoughts on AI. Would you like to see them?
Yep.
Genuinely? There's a report out, Mary Meeker has a really thick desk on artificial intelligence that came out earlier this year. And if you want to deep dive into it, I recommend it. I learned a ton of it. This is an OpenAI survey of 1,299, 1,300 college students, STEM and non-STEM, but this is you guys, right? And you could tell me if this is right. Almost half across the last few years used AI to start papers and projects, to summarize texts, to brainstorm creative projects. I'm not sure what that means. Explore topics, that's kind of vague. Edit writing, I do that. Grammarly is great, right? Mathematical problem solving, being a grader of tests and stuff, I can see how that goes. That's a joke. It's a joke. It's a little bit of, never mind. And then on down the list, right? So, you know, how does this ring true to you? Are these in line with what you think?
I
Yeah,
think they're probably higher.
I would hope so, Sam. I would hope so. In fact, that's my perspective on this. There's no frickin' way I'm gonna regulate it, right? I could write some words on my syllabus. Actually, I'm only allowed 3 options on my syllabus according to the academic regulators on campus. But bottom line is, I don't want to be a policeman, and I don't think anybody else does either. You guys are gonna do this. I do this. You know, I'd do it more if I was more comfortable with the tool. But it's more instinctive to you guys. That's one of the benefits of you. You can predict the future much better. You can predict your future much better than I can. But here's what I think. Increased learning productivity, which is what I'm looking at here. Increased learning productivity means increased learning. Right? So, Sam, how do I get the other 50%? And you're telling me I only have to get another 25% in that. I want all those bars to move up. I want all those bars to move up so we can increase the pace of learning. We can increase the amount of learning that happens. I mean, if learning is if this is a productivity tool for learning, let's embrace it. You know? I know you're hearing more homework. You're hearing more assignments, right? It could also be shorter degrees so that you're out in the workforce faster. Right? There's a whole bunch of quotes around this, and I picked my favorite one. AMD has been in the press, you know, they bought a major FPGA company. The rate at which an organization, i.e. you, learns is the only sustainable competitive advantage. The rate at which you learn, dn dt is equal to a times n. The rate at which you learn is the only way to stay ahead of your competition, or other those bad engineers at other companies. How's that? Not the ones you routinely go out to beer with, so you can get up on all the gossip of things. But here's the other way to think about it. There's really most of the hype that I read about the future of AI is about this artificial general intelligence, right? And I think where we are, especially that list that I showed, was really standard artificial intelligence. And what I'd argue is the difference is after 50 years, 3 doublings, Hamming doublings, right? We have excellent tools to articulate consensus. What everybody thinks, what the average thinks, what the sum total of us think, right? This is not about differences. This is about what's the same about our opinions, right? And so this is consensus. This is a low pass filter. Low pass filters smooth things out. They are very well behaved, right? Averaging, central limit theorem. These things are well behaved, but they're limited. What we really need for this AGI, for the hype, is a tool for recognizing, predicting, initiating the changes and the anomalies and the surprises. That's really not, and that's not what we do now with AI, but that's what we want to do. And those operations are differences, derivatives, subtractions, high pass filters, and those are much harder to make, much harder to control, much harder to manage. Okay. And so this is going to be much better from the point of view of capabilities and impact, but it's also a lot further off than we think, right? So separating out the here and now, recognizing it for what it is versus what the hype is saying it is something I think that if you even if you weren't an engineer, should give you a little bit of comfort. Artificial intelligence respond to user prompts, summarize, organize, codify, repetitive work, right? One thing I've always pushed on you guys is you don't get paid just for your knowledge, you get paid for how you're going to use that knowledge. Artificial intelligence, intelligent, long-running processes that reason and act and execute. Okay, we're a ways away from that. Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI. This is a recent quote, January of this year. We are now confident we know how to build AGI, the bottom part of this, as we have traditionally understood it. Okay, so they're just now getting out their blueprints. They're just now beginning to think about how they were going to build it. That's a big difference from actually going to do it. And they think they know how to do it, right? I would argue artificial intelligence is traditional information engineering, compute, memory, bandwidth at any instant of time. These all get better over time, but any instant of time, one of these is behind or ahead of the others. And that creates two things. It creates an architectural shift, say from mainframes to desktops to the cloud, right? And it also injects money into the ones that are not keeping pace. With AI, we're back at compute. We're putting a lot of money into compute. So there'll be a cycle, there's always been a continuous cycle. A few years ago it was bandwidth. Memory was before that. If I add input and output to this, sensors and so on, I get something called data engineering, which is another field. I first heard the term maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And since then, I've seen an increasing number of people with the title data engineer on their business cards. Right. So perhaps the difference between data science and data engineering is the hardware. Perhaps the difference between data engineering and data science is the real-time nature of it. Right. Think autonomous. If the arrows are going the right direction, then memory will matter soon. Data grooming, data validation, data in real time. Okay. So when AI investment into the hardware, that will ultimately lead to a shift to AI, to investments into memory for AI and for other aspects as well. So when will that happen? It'll be in the next cycle, a few years out. So you could time yourself in your career. You could time yourself by thinking, getting ahead and thinking a little bit about memory while everybody else is thinking about NVIDIA.
Isn't there a handful of groups trying to make programming languages that take advantage of the GPU as opposed to having to grab stuff out of memory and then send it to the GPU?
Yeah, there's also GPUs that have closely tied and embedded memory, so they don't have to go very far.
Yeah, like there's things like called like Mazu or something like that, and it was supposed to like be that it was Python-like, but basically just instantly ran on the GPU. It was loaded into GPU memory and then ran through the GPU.
So you mentioned GPU memory. Memory was actually on chip, and it can be, right? Memory can exist on chip, off chip, and what have you. And again, the smaller the transistors, the more transistors you can put, and you can allocate more transistors for memory as well as more transistors for compute and put them on the same chip. And I will point out that the chip size for the NVIDIA chips are huge relative to the normal packages that we've seen.
Yeah.
And that's exactly to get proximity between compute and memory. Bandwidth is easier if it only has to go a few millimeters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But all that's, yes, so all that stuff, the architecture is still there. But you're right, it's completely shifted in how it's deployed. And those shifts Sam, are what engineers do. They redesign a new chip. They think through these things. That's a paycheck. That's fun. It's a fun paycheck, right? You're entertaining your mind. You're entertaining your mind in a good office setting, usually around intelligent people, predictable hours. A lot of this stuff is done 8 to 6 and maybe occasionally a weekend morning. You can think in terms of 70 hours a week, and you can do that for a little while, but you can't do that for 40 years. You can do that for a few years at a time, right? And then it's burnout. And not very, so it's not really a good sound long-term management technique to just take an expert with all the training that you have and just burn you guys out. That's silly, right? Especially since the world changes slower than we think, right? The other place where it's going is AI will move to the edge as compute hardware for AI becomes cheaper. It'll move closer to the user, which is the edge. So instead of being in data centers, it'll be closer to, say, towers or campuses, and then eventually it'll be even closer. And then bandwidth will become important as well. So working in any of these three areas is a pretty good sustainable job. And thinking through how they relate to each other is a pretty useful picture to have. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think we really have this room for about an hour, so.
I know, I'm wrapping up. AI adoption, how fast will this take? Well, if you kind of look at the numbers here, across the last 18 months, we've penetrated somewhere in this range here. So if you think about it, it's about 7 to 10 years before it's pervasive, right? And that makes sense to me with respect to the pace of technology. Again, the hype, it's easier to predict the future, much harder to predict when it's going to be. My prediction from this data is further out than next Tuesday. Financial picture does not look good for this. We have, and again, this is going to be new to a lot of people. We've got revenue growth that's really, really good. We've got CapEx, capital expenditures, think data centers. Sorry about that. Capital expenditures, think data centers, that's expensive. We have operating expenses, energy and maintenance at 12 to 24%. That's an estimate of mine. Costs are going down. Everyone knows what a token is? Token is the cost that the processing cost that it takes to do one 4-letter word. I love that. Training costs are going way up. People predict that they'll be spending $10 billion per model in the next year or two, up from 100 million now. R&D costs are at 20%. That's a good number, right? Because we like that for development. And so the free cash flows of things like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are down 40% and are now negative. Cash is what you get before your contribution. Free cash flow is what you get before your contribution back to your investors, back to investment activities. It's your cost of goods sold. It's your revenues minus your cost of goods sold. So free cash flow that's going into all the other investments is dropping and bleeding out. So these very, very wealthy, fortunate companies like Microsoft and Google are spending a lot of their treasure on AI. Gradually, how does Google go bankrupt? Gradually and then suddenly. And I'm not picking on Google. It's just the easiest one to say. So this is a very, very risky piece for the incumbents. We could say that's going to be future acquisitions, but with what money? With what money? Incumbents, new entrants. Some of you are very interested in the changes. New entrants. These are going to tend to be specialized, lower cost, lower impact. incumbents are going to probably be soup to nuts kind of solutions. Video, text, pictures, you know, all, and numbers all across, whereas the specialists will focus only on one of those. So my argument is AI is just the same old framework. There's nothing really changed here. It's information engineering, it's electrical computer engineering. It is just what we've always been doing. We're just now in insanely amazing material science, incredible packaging and devices. By the way, these devices are so complicated that NVIDIA actually has to do its own module, its own connections. So that's an example of a little bit of vertical because the industry is so young. Systems and then networks. So we've seen exactly that this framework fits us perfectly, even as we go into this incredibly hype-filled time. This is sort of my fatherly talk slide. It's always, when you're faced with a new situation, when you're faced with something that's bothering you, what's possible to happen, what's likely to happen, what do I want to have happen? That last one has really lowered my blood pressure over the years. I get somebody's really, I get really mad at somebody and I think, I could get mad at him, I could yell, but what do I want to have happen when all of this clears? And it's amazing what that does to your tactics, your strategy. Do what's worth doing, do important things, prioritize. Everything we do has components that are incredibly high risk and things that are very mundane. Focus on lowering the highest risk first. If you spend all your time out here, this risk has not done anything. You'll still fail. So it's better early on to identify the riskiest part and to focus on that. A couple more maritime examples there, imageries, and the whalers, so on. And finally, remember to relax. It's very, very hard to optimize life. Sam, I'm done.
We still have a little bit of time left, so maybe you have questions. I actually have one question if no one else has any others. Could you tell us all what ASML is? You had it in your one of your last slides besides TMSC. TMSC is Taiwan Semiconductors.
Yeah, okay, so
TSMC.
here's a fab at Taiwan Semiconductors. It's a stock picture. This is an ASML machine that fits into this fab. ASML machine is the most advanced photolithography tool. It's the finest paintbrush you can buy at about 5 nanometers. It's absolutely huge. It was engineered to fit into one of those shipping containers so they could actually load it into a cargo plane. And it's about $1 billion, right? So it's an insanely expensive tool, but you cannot make the kind of chips that are kind of high-end chips that are coming out of the top fabs without this particular piece. ASML it's a European company based across borders in Holland and Belgium and maybe Luxembourg, but certainly Belgium and Holland. It's a most preposterous laser and it's incredible. So yeah, that's ASML is the company that makes that, and you'll see it in the press a lot because it is been identified as one of these secret sauces, these magic pieces. Any other questions?
So how does the Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, how does that work as a network?
Yeah, that I struggled with that a little bit too. And so again, the fitting everything into the framework it's malleable. The lines are not sharp. But I figure, first of all, Microsoft is a network. right? Microsoft and Google, they have undersea cables, right? They first got into this with, you may be a little bit young, but Microsoft Live, the Microsoft Xbox, right? That was a little appliance that they snuck it into the house, and it was their experiment on internet communications, right? You'd get on there and you'd play your games, but you'd play your games, they were multiplayer games.
Had to buy the damn card to activate it too.
Yeah, and they ran, so it was their sneaky way of getting internet into your parents' house. And I say this because my son's 30 now, but 15 years ago he was. So that in that case, it's very much a network. In that case, it's also linking together a lot of different things, right? There's all the Meta, well, not so much Meta, but Microsoft and Amazon, they play hardware and software. They play across business, across continents. They have transportation networks. They have communication networks. So I'll stand by. That's why I put that in the top tier. I also put it to differentiate it from these more narrow software like the Anthropic and the ChatGPT, which are the underlying systems, the exemplary of the underlying systems that would go into the AI of Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta. So that was sort of in my head. And again, you will have so much fun with this stuff if you rearrange it, if you look at it differently, because that's where your perspective will be valuable, because it'll be distinct and different and allow alternate points of view and alternate activity and decisions made. So the framework is a framework. What you hang on to it will vary. Yes, sir.
So this may be semi-unrelated, but I feel like it relates
Don't
to
ever
the,
apologize when you ask a question.
I
Don't
think,
ever, you're very well trained, very, very smart. You're here. Just get to the question, because that will save time and it'll be appreciated by you.
okay. I was wondering if you think that because of like how computation, bandwidth, and memory
Yeah.
are in sort of a feedback loop, that like if certain outside factors such as like the Bitcoin, it's like that taking off might have actually influenced the systems to bring about generative AI sooner.
Okay, so the structure, bandwidth, memory, and compute, it's been around forever. A library is that, accounting books and an abacus, right? And moving back and forth, to different offices. Those are their analogs all the way back to probably about the Mesopotamians. Okay? The influence of applications back onto that is absolutely real. So if there are new algorithms, if there are new needs that have to be done, specialized compute, specialized memory, specialized bandwidth will rise to those if the market will allow it to. The other interesting piece of the example you gave, which was cyber currency, or cryptocurrency, that's a financing tool. So if you remember, what are some of the drivers, if there are innovations in the financing of things, matter tremendously in the overall progress of it, for better and for worse. Okay, so your example of cryptocurrency is very, very interesting.
Yeah, well, I was also thinking about it because like it drove big interest into GPUs, which because of that may have actually developed the chips further to the point where we could have generative AI sooner.
And GPUs were developed for gaming,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they're developed, I think NVIDIA developed the first GPU for the Sega Saturn.
Was it that, or I think you might be right. I was gonna guess Sony, but I think you're right. And now they're specialized AI chips. And NVIDIA is migrating towards that. All right, I'm not going anywhere. I'm on faculty here. I know most of you guys. If you have questions, if you want to bother me, I'd love feedback, on this talk. First time I gave it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good one.
Yeah.
So if any of you are interested in joining the IEEE club, I have the QR code here. If you want to scan it, you can join our Discord server.